Our new health care laws within our nation reflect, as best as I can tell, the one that was created here in Massachusetts not too long ago. But what impact will this new law have on the college students of America? How will this new national health care law impact each of you? We are so fortunate that Congressman John Over is here to help us understand. Our congressman is a rare politician. He is a chemist, and as such, thinks and analyzes like one. He is a teacher, eager to engage, enlighten, and encourage. He is a modest, humble servant of the people interested in service. He is also committed to honest civil discourse. And our congressman is also a leader who is now chair of the Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, and is a member of the Appropriations Committee. At a time when critical analysis is needed, but all too often not found, at a time when engagement, encouragement, and optimism are on the wane, at a time when debate and intellectual discourse seems abandoned, and at a time when leadership must step up, our elected representative to Congress stands tall. That was a funny one. I liked it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you our Congressman John Over.
President Bob, is that what people called you when you said good morning, folks, or something like that? Was it? Dr. Bob. Okay, Dr. Bob. Okay, fine. I didn't quite get exactly what you were saying about standing tall, except that I can't help it. Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is quite a good crowd. I was at MCLA on Friday, and I think I had about a quarter as many people. So, Dr. Bob, you have produced quite a number of people here this morning. Thank you. It's just about 2 weeks now ago that the President signed the health care law, and after we had finally passed it in its final versions, and that bill is the most comprehensive piece of legislation related to health care in 2 generations, going back to 1967, when in 2 different acts, 2 separate acts, Medicare and Medicaid, were both passed in that year under the Johnson administration. So these things, and before that, the previous huge difference was when Social Security was created in 1937. So the first major set of changes came 30 years after Social Security, and now the second major set of changes comes another 43 years after that. The new law assures that every American citizen has access to quality, affordable health insurance for themselves and their families. They don't have to they don't have to use it, but they have access to that. Now, the new law also has, because of the way that the legislation had to be passed, it also has a major title. It has 2 titles, one on health care and health insurance, and one on education and issues related to education. And I'm going to just cover quickly those issues that relate to education, because they have a primary interest for everyone at community colleges around the country. How many of you are on financial aid? A lot of you. A lot of you probably have loans. How many have loans? A lot have loans. How many of you are on Pell Grants? quite a few on Pell Grants. Okay, well, it does affect quite a large number of you. Some are lucky enough not to have at least put up their hand. First of all, there are some changes to student financial aid. Now, for Pell Grants, the legislation defines an increase in the Pell Grant awards from 5,500 to 59, almost 6,000 in the year 2017. Now, you'll quickly recognize that that isn't a very large increase on a year-by-year basis. It's only 1% or so on a year-by-year basis. But we have had no cost, there has been no inflation because of the poor economy this year, and so there would not, even if you tried to do it with inflation, there would be no increase whatsoever. So in 2010, people will be getting $55.50. And after the year 2013, assuming that we have begun to really grow the economy again, then we will tie it to inflation. But the law otherwise defines what it will be each year through 2017, except that after 2013, if the inflation rate is higher, then that will kick in and move the Pell Grants up by the inflationary amount. And this becomes then a mandatory expenditure, so it becomes what some would call an entitlement for students to get their college educations. That defines what happens to Pell Grants. Those of you who have them, and now this is going to have a very small effect upon you, but in the future it has a growing effect. For student lending, starting July 1st, any new persons taking any new loans that are given out are going to be done by shifting to a direct loan program from the Department of Education, Federal Department of Education, and the Treasury, as opposed to going through the middlemen, which have been the private banks in the last several years, which cuts out that middle process. And there will still be contracts whereby the Department of Education bids out to service the loans, but it is expected to cost a lot less. It's expected to save taxpayers $60 billion. You will still have to pay back your loans, although there is included in the legislation that any remaining debt will be forgiven for a group of public service workers, in essence, which includes teachers, nurses in health systems, public health systems and such, people who are in the military. If they still have anything at the 10-year level, that will be forgiven. And so there is projected to be some 1.2 million new borrowers projected to qualify and take part in this change in procedure that will save the taxpayers a lot of money. And this is one of the things that was able to pay in large measure for the expanded health care issue. Now, there are other things that are of interest to community college. There has never been a major capital or program for community colleges at the federal level. And now, in this legislation, we have put in $2 billion to be used over the next 5 years, to go to capital and programmatic program development in the community colleges around the country. There's also $2.5 billion is going to go to what have been historically African American serving colleges or Hispanic American colleges, and that would include minority colleges that serve, say, Asians or Pacific Islanders as such. It may cover a couple of colleges in Hawaii, for instance, in that score, which have become traditionally Pacific and Pacific Islanders, Oriental or Pacific Islander colleges. That $2.5 billion is intended and specified to help them build in those colleges programs for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what has been called the STEM programs, which we at the national level have been putting significant money into the four-year colleges up to now for those very same areas. So that is another advantage to go to people who are in the minority-serving colleges around the country. That pretty much summarizes the education components, the key education components of the legislation. So with that, I would like to then turn back to to give you some thoughts about the healthcare parts of the bill. With a clicker. This chart is supposed to just identify some reasons why we're doing this. And it is a pretty dramatic set of data that one sees if you compare this country with other industrialized countries. Let me just take the G7 countries, which are the United States, Italy, France, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, and Japan. And comparing them, we now spend 17% of our gross national product, of our whole economy, now goes into the delivery of health care. The highest number for those of our biggest industrialized competitors, for those countries, the highest number is about 12%. And it drops all the way down to only about 7% in the case of Great Britain, which has a specific budget for health care and has lived within that budget over the years. So it's almost 50% larger now, and it's going up much faster. Our health care costs have been going up by double-digit inflation year after year now for at least a decade. So I've used just the number 50. I've given you the G7 countries, our largest industrialized competitors. And if you look at others of the, which include places like Australia and New Zealand and the Netherlands and Belgium, others, Ireland and Spain, they have often a lower amount of expended than places like France and Switzerland, and France are about the highest of the other industrial nations. And so the average of 50 is roughly correct, it being 50% more expensive. And I give you the data for that group of our important trading partners and competitors. Now, the reason that's of some importance is that every industry in this country, that particularly the older industries, the larger industries, the car companies, the major equipment manufacturers, and so on, which have always had been involved in our healthcare insurance provided through their workplace, their competitive position is hurt by the fact that the cost of the healthcare insurance is so much higher here than in most of these competitors. And we have seen the result of that. Partly the automobile industry's problem has been because of that differential that made our products going to other places considerably more expensive. So it does, in a broad way, have a substantial impact. Now, that would be all right, I suppose, if we were getting really fine health outcomes. We do have the most expensive healthcare system in the world, basically, per person, the most expensive. we have very fine, high technology healthcare, very expensive kind of procedures. We do more transplants, for instance, organ transplants and so forth, than anybody else really in pretty much anybody else in the world. But when it comes down to some very basic kinds of data, all of those G7 countries, every single one of them has longer life expectancy by between 2 and 3 years. So Americans are enduring a lower lifespan in spite of the fact that we're spending so much money on health care. Secondly, all of those countries have, I have it written there, 40%, we have 40% higher infant mortality rates than the average of those other countries, those G7 countries. And that carries over to the other major industrial countries, smaller industrial countries, such as the ones that I named. That carries over. Those have all had for a long time good healthcare systems that allow all their citizens to be covered. And then one that is a little bit more difficult to explain, the preventable deaths. We have a 40% higher rate of preventable deaths. That is to say, of young people, people who are dying at an early age, earlier than need be, from things like cancer and diabetes and heart disease, those being preventable deaths in large measure. And our rates of death for people dying younger than you'd expect is a very significant higher death rate from those diseases. Now, the reason for that is that we have a sizable group of our people, or a major part of the reason is that we have a sizable group of our people who do not have health insurance in a steady kind of a way that gives them primary and preventive care in a steady way in their younger years. Most of our people who are uninsured are young people, such as yourselves, coming out of you're insured on your parents. We'll get to a little bit further on that in just a moment, but on your parents' insurance for up to the time you leave college, say. And then there's a lot of people who are in their first working years of life, and at the years that they're starting their families, when they are living at relatively low wage, of course. You start out with a low wage. By the time you go through several jobs and have been out in the business for a period of time, your income goes up, and you usually end up in some of those companies that do provide health insurance for their employees, and you're in a better position and do have health insurance that covers primary and preventive care. Now, one of the factors that is true of all of these industrialized nations is, the ones that I've named at least, is that they spend 2/3 of their dollars, their health care dollars, on primary and preventive care. We, on the other hand, spend about 1/3 of our health care dollars expended on primary and preventive care. And so what's happening is that they get early diagnosis, early indication of what the risks are there for them, and they manage to avoid those, what leads to much more expensive health care later. You all probably remember, if not you directly, your parents making comments about an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, usually it's an old British saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's merely saying that if you can spend a few dollars on prevention in the first place, you can avoid a later expenditure of much more money on trying to cure what has not been prevented. So that is an issue for a sizable number of our younger people, it is more dramatic in the minority population than in the majority population, but it's there for young people across the board that are moving out into their working lives and beginning to build families of their own. And some of you, many of you in this room obviously already have families, but some of you will be doing exactly those things in the next few years. So that's the issue with, and those are just examples of the kinds of preventable deaths. By good primary and preventive care, one can avoid high expenditure and the risk of death at an early age that goes with the failure to provide that kind of care. Now, one of the things that we are going to be doing in the new legislation is we're going to double the number of people who get served in our community health care centers. For many years, for about 40 years, roughly going back to the late 60s, roughly the time that Medicaid and Medicare were created, we have developed a group of community health centers, which Franklin County has one, Massachusetts has 55. There are about 1,200 of them around the country, and they serve about 20 million people at the present time. They get federal money if they're serving uninsured people, people who have no insurance or underinsurance, either one, but good many people go to the community health centers who actually have insurance. They use it as their primary place to get care. And much of what those community health centers do is primary and preventive care. So what we are going to be doing over the next 5 years is doubling the number of people who get served in those community health centers to 40 million people. And a good many people who either are on Medicaid or are parts of the new system of having available insurance for the access and the insurance for younger people and people early in their working lifetime. Many people in those categories will get their health care from the community health centers in the expanded way, in the expanded form. We are also in that process going to have to train primary and preventive care personnel. And so there will be a lot of, and in order to do that, you've got to give better pay for primary care people that usually the pay has been less. And so a lot of doctors have gone into specialists because they expect, even though the cost of the education is going to be much greater, they expect to get back a much higher return after they have gotten all of their accreditations and so forth. So we are going to be needing to train nurses serving in advanced practice, nurse practitioners, nurse midwives, nurse anesthetists and such. There are several categories of nursing. Some of you must be in nursing, I would assume. Yeah, okay, okay. Those who go into these advanced practice ranges will also benefit from the additional pay that will go along with it. We are also going to provide that if people serving in those community health centers have high loans coming out of their education, that they will be able to dispose of those loans by service of a certain number of years in the community health center. Then they are able, once those are out of the way, they're able to go on wherever they want. But if they provide, I think it probably varies. I couldn't tell you precisely. It's probably 2 to 5 years of service in the community health center systems, and they will be able to put aside their student loans along the way. So let me then, that indicates how we're going to deal with the primary and preventive care. let me have another click here and indicate what is the way that the insurance system, as it is being set up, will affect you directly. Beginning within a few months, 5 months from now, on the 1st of October, at the beginning of the new fiscal year, everyone will be able to stay on their parents' health insurance until age 26, if your parents choose to keep you there, okay? It requires the parental consent and the parental agreement to stay there. That ought to be a considerable benefit to a good many of you in this room. Then, starting January 1st in 2014, this is the guts of the access to insurance for all American citizens. The Medicaid threshold will be raised to the income level, which is 133% of the federal poverty level. Federal poverty level is a defined number, about $10,000, just over $10,000 these days, nationwide, regardless of the cost of living in places, which is a bit of an oddity, but that's the way it has been written and used over the years. And for a single person, it's about $10,500 or so dollars. For a family of 4, it's listed as about twice that, about $20,000 dollars. So that 133% of the federal poverty level becomes, maybe it would be maybe 22,000. The 133% of the federal poverty level for a single person would be 14,000, and a family of 4 under that level of 29,000, they would be eligible for Medicaid directly. After that, there will be a series of exchanges. Each state will be setting up insurance exchanges, very similar to what Massachusetts did 3-4 years ago. And there will be at least three choices from which one can choose the insurance plan that you would like to have. There's going to have to be lots of good information out for everybody as to what those insurance plans include and cover. Each one will have a different level of premiums and copays. However, each of those plans, depending upon your income level, if your income is at the 100, just above the Medicaid eligibility level, then you will get a sizable subsidy of payment, but in the way of tax credits. In the way of tax credit, it doesn't come as money directly from the Treasury in a check, but rather in terms of tax credit against your tax liabilities from whatever work you happen to be involved in, and all the way up to 400% of the federal poverty level. That 400% of federal poverty level takes you up to about $40,000 a year for an individual and almost $90,000 a year for a family of 4. The degree of subsidization is not a straight line increase over that range. It is a larger amount at the lower level, and then it goes down. I guess I should say it's a higher degree of tax credit as at the start, at the lower end of the income scale, and it drops on a kind of a sine curve. You know how sine curves look, and then at the end there's very little in the way of coverage of assistance being given to people in the last 100 or so of the federal poverty level. Remember that for families, for individuals and families, the median income in the country nowadays is somewhere in the $50,000 range for a family of 4, $50,000 to $55,000 for a family of 4. And it's a little hard to keep up with the numbers because within this economic difficulty that we've been in now for about 3 years, we've been in recession for just about 3 years with, as you know, considerable job losses and a lot of unemployed people over that 3-year period of time. The family income has not gone up. In fact, in many cases, it has simply gone down. All right, so that explains how the exchanges that are going to be set up. It takes time to get those going, to write the regulations at the state level and at the federal level to make that work. And so there was quite a big argument about whether it ought to be, many people, including myself, thought we ought to be able to do it by 2013 rather than 2014. But it finally got decided to do it right, make certain that it was done with all the best data that we would need to set those up. That 2014, which 3 years goes pretty quickly. So it's 3.5 years and we'll be there. Now, that's what happens for those who are presently uninsured. So with that together, we will have, as I said in the first place, we will have made it possible for people to have access to this insurance. If they absolutely will not do not want to go into these exchanges, they can pay a penalty. An individual or the family can pay a penalty, which goes into a pool of monies that then for those people will pay for their health insurance when they go to the emergency rooms, as they have been doing. Now, the thing that most people do not understand about this is that we have been paying, the people who have health insurance have been paying a penalty. All of them who have health insurance have been paying a penalty which on average for families around this country who have health insurance is more than $1,000 a year that they have to pay into their health insurance systems in order to provide a pool. That's the way it has been done in the past, so that hospitals and emergency rooms will provide care to people who are uninsured. Well, it's a question of fairness, it seems to me, that you set up a system, and that's why there is a penalty that is required if some number of people, the estimate has been by our staffs in Washington, that there would be still somewhere in the 5 to 10 million people who simply won't have insurance. But we will have provided in this, according to the estimates again, somewhere around 30 million people of those who presently do not have insurance, an insurance through the exchange system. Now, it's much more complicated there are other things, but I think that for folk in this audience and at a community college, I think this covers the key things that would affect you now in terms of aid and in the future as you go out into the workforce with all good aspirations and expectations of how you're going to become another Bill Gates or whatever it may happen to be. So I have mentioned that the new law funds the community health center expansion, which I think is really very important. I've been a strong supporter of community health centers over the years. My district has community health centers providing care for almost the whole district. There's just a couple of little pockets in the district. Northern Berkshire County, which has chosen not to go that route, probably will within the next few years, and so forth. That's a really primary way that we will get prevention care done over the future, and that should help. It isn't going to help The statistics that I gave you at the very beginning about life expectancy and infant mortality and preventable deaths, those cannot be corrected immediately. They're not going to be corrected in less, I would guess, less than a generation of having systems of this sort that, as do our other countries that have health insurance for all their citizens. So that's the pattern, and I have high hopes that within a generation, though I won't be around here to examine the matter at that time, that we will have seen the closing of those gaps. Thank you very much for listening. You've been